Today's COVID update is brought to you by Fulltech Systems, your technology center, where you'll come for the price but stay for the service.
And we're back, and we're moving into our first conversation for today as we talk about the National Recovery Strategy as prepared by the Belize network of NGOs. With us, we have Osmani Salas, who is the NGO Senator. He's joining us via Zoom. And on the phone with us, we have Froila Salam, who is the chair of the Belize network of NGOs. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Belize.
We do appreciate you guys having this conversation with us and letting us know the work that you've been up to. And Froila, let's start with you and the BNN's decision to put together this paper.
Okay, well, I'll just give a quick overview of how we did it.
Okay.
Marlene, as you're aware, BNN has some 40 NGO members, and we have been an integral part of the whole conversation nationally from the time the Prime Minister invited the BNN to be a member of the National Oversight Committee.
Yes.
And our Andre on that committee, our member on that committee is Andre Carrillo. And ever since then, we have been engaged in weekly discussions with Andre regarding what is taking place so that when he represents us, he knows truly what our thoughts are and how to move forward. But beyond that, we thought that it really was timely for us to put forward a national planning agenda based on the civil society perspective, of course, of which the NGOs are members of. So that really started a discussion on how we can look at sustainable development from a macro perspective, from a global perspective. Because as you are aware, this pandemic has basically broken all the rules, all the systems. And now we're basically looking at the landscape, say, how can we recover on a basis that will make this country more resilient and our society more resilient. So we looked at all the expertise that we had within our members, and we also asked others to join us in this discussion. And that's basically how this plan slowly started forming and taking shape to what we now have as what we're terming as the National Recovery Strategy.
Yes.
Marlene.
Now, it's interesting to see the level of involvement that you have in putting together the plan. Mm-hmm. You have from medical advisors, you have people who work within the system and also persons who are involved in different NGOs. What was the collaboration like?
It was really, as you say, we knew that whatever we did, it had to be from a multi-sectoral approach. And we knew we had many people who had been working in these various sectors. Mm-hmm. And they wanted to be a part of the discussion. I mean, it was very clear from the beginning that we didn't have to ask too hard or ask, too many people. It was people coming forward to us saying, we are concerned with what's taking place. We want to be a part of the recovery. So it was a very... a very touching moment for us because it was clear that we were not on our own. Yeah. And so gathering the expertise, all we did was literally reach out to certain people and we sent out a call through email and to our WhatsApp, within our group, and people came forward. And that's basically how we were able to get the volunteers to start the process. Yeah. I think, and Osmani can help me with this, but basically, all the volunteers that we had, we asked them, what is it that you want to contribute to this process? And based on that, then we held a forum where they made a 10-minute presentation on what their recommendations were, what they saw as the problem and what their short-term, medium, and long-term recommendations would be. And that kind of started the whole process of how we then would take all these ideas and put them into a coherent format, because I can tell you there were many, many suggestions, lots of expertise. Yeah. And the challenge for us was how are we going to put this into a coherent document, a white paper, so to speak, that made sense and really was relevant to what we were experiencing and what we hope the future could also be for us.
Mm-hmm. What I found interesting... Sorry, go ahead, Senator.
Yes, Marlene, thank you. If I may, two things that became quite evident to us at the BNN was that it was the level of expertise that we have among our network, within our network. and associated with our network, and also the individuals, other experts, not necessarily within our network, that were very willing to volunteer their time, as Ferla has pointed out, towards this effort. So they look at the Belize network of NGOs as a credible group, yes, as wanting to be associated with such a group. So like Ferla, I felt very good about that, and it shows that our network is working, and we have a lot that we can contribute. So we did see, after this social and economic crisis as a result of COVID-19 that we are living right now, we saw a gap in a national response. And really that was the impetus for us as a network to organize this initiative, this forum with well-researched presentations, and the work of putting this report together. We felt that this would be a good contribution from our side, from our network. No?
Yeah, and when you speak of economic recovery, you are also, or you're not, or I should say that you are also looking at it not only at a multifaceted approach in terms of the different sectors of the economy, but you're also looking at different levels of recovery, meaning long-term, short-term, etc., correct?
One message is clear from our report. We need to repurpose the way we do things. Mm-hmm. We cannot afford to go back to business as usual. And I already see signs of that happening. So if we go back to business as usual, we would have learned nothing from this crisis. We would have not used the opportunities that this crisis, in every crisis, there are opportunities. And so it was very refreshing back in March, only about 2 weeks after the reading and the presentation and approval of the national budget, is when this crisis hit us. Right. It was very refreshing when, and a lot of kudos to the Prime Minister, when he set up this National Oversight Committee and invited the leader of the opposition to co-chair it along with him, and kudos to the leader of the opposition for accepting as well and for serving for, I think, almost 3 months. So that was very refreshing. It really set Belize apart from many other countries in the way we approach the management of this crisis, and inviting the social partners to be a part of this committee.
And I think what you're saying, I think what you're saying is a critical point. There were some things I think that the public agrees we did do right. But in fact, if we're to look at what the most loud criticism is at this point of the management of the pandemic, is the lack of a plan. Mm-hmm. And we've heard it more from the economic recovery standpoint. But what is interesting about your national strategy is that it goes beyond just the economy. You're talking education. You're looking into some of the gaps within the health sector, and even touching on tourism as well. And Froila, if I am to look at your press release, you said we need to stop talking about putting these things in place and just get them done. The time is now. Tell me about this particular statement that you have, and how you use the opportunity on the NOC to maybe get us to a point where there's a national plan that everybody knows about.
Sure. I wanted to echo also what the Senator was saying regarding business as usual. What exactly do you mean by that? For instance, I am an economic neophyte. I am no way an expert. However, it began to dawn on me that when experts say that we have to make sure that we have a debt to GDP ratio that's not above 100%. We're in very risky ground when we go above 100%. So I did some background research, and what I found out was it's not so much your the percentage of your debt to what your GDP is, but rather how you get that debt in the first place. So we're looking at investment that is really going to speed to set down a new foundation. As we have all realized, Belize is an open economy. It means we're very vulnerable to what the global world says should take place in terms of a macro level decision, in terms of what the economic policies are. And so what we're saying here is we know that we have always been terribly, we're not really resilient. That's a word that really comes true. We're not resilient as communities, we're not really resilient as a society or as a country to deal with these shocks to the system. I would say, Marlene, that what we need to look at more closely is how do we look at risk and mitigate them? Because the reality is that unless we start to tackle those from a broader perspective, even if it's COVID-19 this year, it will be a COVID-20 or whatever the next virus will be called in the next 5 years, and we're still going to be in the same position. And what we're saying as well is when you look at the educational system, it's not only kids not being in school and getting them back to school, but also the longer issues of what are we teaching our children? How are we teaching them to really contribute to a developing country's needs and not developed countries' needs? As you know, we have massive brain drain from our country, from cities migrating to other countries, but also from rural communities where our brain drain also takes place when those people leave and they come to Belize City, they go elsewhere. And so across the board, we can see at a very minimal instance where something so simple as a brain drain has impact at the community level, national level. Yeah. And at the health rate, we know that we will never be able to have enough money to have the kind of healthcare system that we have in the States. But what we can look at, for example, drastic example between Cuba and the U.S. in terms of how much money the society has. The U.S. has the best health system in the world, and yet it's very vulnerable, and minority people are the ones who are not able to access it. And so we have almost, what COVID-19 has really revealed is the stark difference between the very poor and those who have the means to be able to combat, staying at home from work. Because the reality is, Marlene, we even believe that a lot of people could not really afford to stay home. They had to go to work, so all of the social distancing, the state of emergency, the curfew, there was a massive impact. And I know that we try to assist, but going forward, that cannot be a plan. Yeah. That is not a plan that will take us very far. It will just keep us in the same situation, no matter what the risk or what emergency we're dealing with at that time. So we need to do something. And I would say that BNN does have membership serving on different steering committees that have government and other agencies on. So we are participating at that level, but I think we need to go more institutional and systemic. We're not there yet, and that's where we need to be, because our delivery work that we're doing as individuals does not count in much if the systems do not change. And I think that's kind of what we're also asking for at BNN. We need to change that system. We cannot just follow the crowd.
With what you're outlining, with your knowledge of all these other subcommittees, would you agree that part of the challenge in being able to move forward is that the plans are disjointed, that there isn't some sort of formalization of where we go from here?
Indeed, and I think, so there has to be two discussions, one at the horizontal level, one at the vertical level. Yeah. So we agree that there has to be multi-sectoral discussion. Yes. There is no doubt of that. Yeah. It is not taking place at the level that it needs to take place. So that is why BNN has been very insistent that we reach out to others. We don't have the answers. And unless we work together in tandem, a lot of what we end up with will be just another plan to sit on the shelf to gather dust until another pandemic comes along to say, to ask, why are we here again? Yeah. That's the challenge, Marlene. Yeah. But I think that part of it is communication. We need, one of the steps for us after this is representing it that this is our plan, this is our suggestion. But by no means does it end here. We have to socialize it within our membership, and we have to socialize it with our partners. Yeah. So, because we have been in discussion with our partners as well, and we know that there are common themes, and so we need to work on those commonalities.
And Senator Salas, you were...
Yes, and going back to what I said earlier about repurposing the way we do things, that I don't want that message to be lost. And to add to what Froila said just now, if we miss this opportunity, it will be tremendously disappointing. Now look, most countries in the world measure the state of the economy by GDP, right? Gross domestic product, the cost of goods and services that are produced annually in a country. So it's about growth, 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 and I think another message that is in our strategy is that it has to be more than just growth. It has to be about letting our people thrive even if there's not this constant forever growth. Because if we keep doing things the way we are doing it, our economy will grow, but we will still have a high level of poverty. The poverty rate has already increased tremendously. The rich will get richer. And so we need to repurpose. We need to ensure that whether we have this constant GDP growth or not, we are meeting the needs of our people, the basic needs of our people. So as we know, many people have been left in the lurch. Many people are worse off than they were before March. And we cannot sustain for any great length of time. We cannot sustain what we're doing right now during this current crisis, right? So we need to repurpose, and we cannot have the same individuals, the same groups of people, trying to figure out how we go from here. This is where we need a comprehensive national response. Yeah. The government needs to involve the opposition. The social sector needs to be involved, and we need to work on solving this together. One of the unfortunate things this year is, as I said a few days ago in the Senate, in a manner of speaking, it's unfortunate that this year is an election year. Why do I say that? Yeah. Election must happen. Constitutionally, we are supposed to have our elections within a few months. But in every election year, the politicians find millions upon millions of dollars to invest in their campaigns to get elected. This year, all the money we are able to secure should go towards our crisis response and figuring out where we go from here. So you will see.
Senator Salas, that is a really critical point that you're talking about. One of the things we've heard by guests right here on the show is that the danger of this pandemic happening in an election year is how decisions can be made with political biases in mind. And that's just speculation that people have, but you are talking about one of the issues where we have this huge influx of funds because we're borrowing to be able to assist with the crisis that we're in. But we don't have a budget. And we don't know precisely the accounting behind this money that's coming in. And so this takes me right into one of your recommendations, because I think they're really interesting. And I think in your press release you said not all of it is new. That's true. But I love that you have formatted it so simply. What can we do in 1 to 3 months? What can we do within the first year? What can we do looking at the long term in each area, from the economy to tourism to health to education? So I hope people get the chance to look at it. But the short-term recommendation in economic recovery is asking for a budget.
Yes. All the projections that went into preparing our 2020-21 budget really went right out through the door once COVID-19 hit. So one of our recommendations really is we need to repurpose our budget. It needs to be a national recovery budget, because when that budget was put together, while in the Prime Minister's speech, he did mention COVID-19 a couple of times, but he spoke about it as something still out there. And if it hits, then it would be economic chaos. Well, it hit. Yeah. And our national budget was not planned with that crisis in mind. So that went through the door. Yeah. And that needs to be replanned, right? That needs to be redesigned. That's one of the recommendations we made. Another one we made is that we have realized, and many of us had said this over the years, but it happened, that our economy has been so highly dependent on tourism, such a fickle industry, made us highly vulnerable, and now we see the result. Tourism is at a standstill, and we are in the worst social and economic crisis of our time, right? So it also goes to show, and it's linked to our recommendations in agriculture and food security. Agriculture is the way to go. We need to focus more energy, more resources in strengthening the agriculture sector. You focus on food security, but at the same time realizing that in the short to medium term, we're still highly dependent on tourism. At some point, our international airport needs to reopen. We need to be prepared for what will come next. But our economy has been so dependent on tourism that tourism has to be, part of the answer going forward in the short to medium term. But if we learn something from this crisis, is that we need to diversify our economy, and we need to focus on agriculture much more than we have done.
And one of the other areas that the report also looks at, it also examines some of the existing problems with the status quo, and you have certain recommendations in regards to the current way, let's say, that the government spends money, and in particular, one of your focuses is on reduction of the wage bill, as one example. So it's interesting that the report also looks at how the government spends its money and on what, rather, and in addition to the various industries.
Well, at some point that needs to be looked at very critically. Our wage bill is about $500 million, that's $400 and something million. We need to be real, and I'm not a politician, so we could look at it this way, that just as some in the private sector have done, we had to find ways to survive during this period, which included reducing the working hours, etc., with the agreement of the employees, just so that their jobs could be saved for when things start to normalize. No, I had to do that in my family business here in Orange Walk. Many have had to do that across the country. So at some point, government needs to do that as well. Of course, in discussion and collaboration with the Public Service Union, with the various unions, right? But it's something that no politician will want to touch, especially in an election year. That's the reality. But it makes me say that during this crisis, what we need are leaders. We don't need the usual politics. We need the leadership to solve this going forward, and this is where we have to make the hard decisions.
I thought that was interesting as well, because it is one of the more controversial cost-saving measures anytime it comes up for discussion, the idea of reducing the public wage bill that we do pay. And I think you rightly noted that it is a highly political issue and divisive because, of what it comes along with.
We wouldn't want to be, it would be worse to be put in a situation where the decision will be made for us from the outside, externally. And then it could be even worse. So while we have an opportunity to make our own decisions, our own national decisions, it would be some pain in the short term, but it would be better for us over the medium to long term, rather than the other way around when the decision is made for us.
So you touched a bit on agriculture, and Froila, of course, you can join in with us maybe on this one too. I looked at your health recommendations and I found them really interesting. And here's why. Because when I look at the people who have contributed to your plan, it is a mix between public and private sector. It's people who are actually currently working in mitigating and minimizing the effects of the pandemic, and people who are perhaps more in private practice. And there seems to be quite a bit of short-term action that has to be done, even just looking at things as simple as hospital flow. Do you want to share some insight on these recommendations?
Sure. What happened was we, like I said, we had made a call out to see who all would be interested in participation and giving some of the feedback on where we are and how we can move forward. And I have to be careful how I say this. It is not to criticize what is taking place right now.
Yeah.
However, we recognize that in order, I think one of our members put it clearly, health system is a system. It's teamwork. And so therefore, when you look at the healthcare system, it's not just the doctors who are the most important, but everybody from the person that does the cleaning to the nurse, the meal attendant, all of them have a role to play. And so if we look at that as the analogy for how we're going to recover our system, then not the way to recover, but how do we deal with this pandemic and on top of everything else that we have going on in the country? As you are aware, Marlene, this is the rainy season and there's a spike in dengue.
Yeah.
Most still are coming to hospitals. So that was the experience that was being brought, that we can't be just thinking about COVID-19. We need to think about the whole systemic problem that we've been having with the healthcare system, starting with the fact that there has been gradually less funding for the healthcare over the last 10 years. And what we can say is that how do you recover from that? Because within that time frame, while the government percentage for the healthcare has decreased, we see an increasing number of private hospitals who are going there. So we need to even look at that discussion from a different level, because I don't know, there is something missing here, because how is it that we have more private hospitals, but yet the public healthcare system, which so many of us are dependent on, is getting less access to these resources. So that's why we're saying that when we start to unravel the layer of this onion, it gets more and more complex the further we go on. But the reality is that we cannot, how can a small country have so many private hospitals? That's just the tip of the iceberg question. So that's why we were able to get experts to say, look, we see what is taking place. We want to be a part of the solution. And that's why we were able to get from both the private healthcare, you were saying, the different sectors coming in to say, we can do better.
And you're also, in that regard, you're also speaking about the establishment of certain policies. I know that, for example, on the short-term recovery plan, you had included recommendations to, for example, hotels and the tourism industry to establish protocols for dealing with the pandemic while it's still a reality. So I would imagine that the medical insight was invaluable to creating recommendations like that for the various sectors.
In relation to that, Gavin,
what we realized too was that we talked about planning, and the reality is that one of the reasons why we were in support of extending the quarantine for another month was that we wanted to give more time for planning, not only to actually have a paper plan, but to operationalize those plans. And we haven't really seen that for various reasons. And the reality is this disease is just there waiting to come back. And we know that we are very, very vulnerable. And so how do we put something in place where, look, the reality is if COVID comes and we have a spike in very extreme cases, we're going to have to make moral decisions as to who are going to have access to health care that allow them to live or to die. That has happened in other countries. Italy went through it because their health care system was so overwhelmed, they could not take care of everybody. And doctors and the frontline people had to make very stressful decisions as to who would get those ventilators.
And actually, those types of protocols should be developed before we reach that phase. And it's a terrible decision, but not one that should be made on the spot.
Yes.
We have been very fortunate up to now, and I have to give a lot of credit to the National Oversight Committee and the various committees, the Director of Health Services and his team, etc. Because of all those efforts, we don't have more cases than we have now. I think the grand total up to now, I believe, is 30, if I'm not mistaken. My district in Orange Walk now is no longer the only district that have none, unfortunately. But I'm making that point because another thing that was included in our report is that the importance of our individual responsibility, right, to comply with the various health guidelines. We have done well up to now in managing this first wave, but right across the border, in Guatemala and especially Mexico, where things are going haywire, we still have the border jumpers. We have people not cooperating. We have people buying physical.
Senator, it seems that we're having a bit. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So if we as individuals do not do our part to abide by the physical distancing requirements, wear our masks properly, etc., then this thing will get really bad. And that is when that scenario well painted could very well happen, where our health facilities will be overridden, right? We will not be able, as I'm hearing, is close to happening in nearby Chetumal, where they are rapidly running out of hospital bed space. Now, we don't want that happening in Belize, but for that not to happen, we have to abide by our individual obligations to respect and follow the guidelines.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You know, there's so much to cover in terms of the recommendations that you're putting forward. As I mentioned earlier, you have broken them down into different sectors. You've identified some of the existing challenges and some of the challenges moving forward. Since we don't have the time to go through all of them, let me just ask individually, what's one of the goals, the recommendations that you've put forward that you really hope will take root? I understand that you're hoping that the document will be adopted, but if you were to just bring to the public's attention one of the recommendations, what would that be?
That's $1 million question.
Pick one of your favorite babies. Froila laughs.
You know, I always look at the role of the individual and the role of systems. And for me, I agree with the senator that we have to take the personal responsibility to do the social distancing and all the protocols being recommended and wear a mask. But I think that I would feel I am a part of a bigger system if we can say, how can we minimize these things from happening? So personally, what I would want from a result of all of this is generally more cross, multi-sectoral, synergy.
Yeah.
We have to look, that's me, Marlene, because we have so many recommendations here that it's hard to say which one to take. So for me, it is like we need to work together as partners, particularly given that this is an election year. We know we need the process to be transparent. We need the process to be accountable, whether it's looking at the budget, which, as you know, we've had issues with over the past. We're not particularly pleased with how it's presented. But politically, economically, socially, there has to be synergies across the levels, across the experts. That's the only way I can see us recovering. But because if not, we're going to find ourselves in the same situation, or we will not recover. This could be one of those moments where we look back 30 years and say, why did we do certain things? And I think this is one of those moments. And I hope that we, from our part as BNN, will continue to reach out. We will continue to see how we can take our plans and operationalize some of the basic ones that don't require much money, for instance, but just some time and effort.
Yeah. Senator?
Yeah, I'll mention two very quick points. One has to do with education. Just yesterday, for instance, I went to get my daughter registered for second form, and I saw just the few students that were there, some of the other people that were there. I saw the majority not following the right, safety health protocols. So it's really scary to think that if school reopens as it had been for normal, I fear what could happen with the children. Children are children. They don't think like us adults, and when they see each other after months apart, physical distancing will be impossible. And I'm scared about what that would mean for the infection rate and bringing that at home. And oh my goodness, it's so scary. So we have to look at some of our recommendations in there to have like a combination of face-to-face and online virtual learning. So we have a lot to do between now and August 10th, I believe, when school reopens, to put the right systems in place for that, to minimize as much as possible the possibility for infection. And secondly, back to repurposing the way we do things, we need to have a national discussion on how we move forward. If we don't, and all we do is, all the two mass political parties do is just focus on spending to get elected, we will have lost a golden opportunity to repurpose the way we do things. It sounds idealistic, but this is the time to change the way we do things. And if we don't, our political leaders will have let us down.
Yeah. I want to ask one final question, because at least for me, it's the putting together of the strategy and presenting it to the NOC. You do have hopes that it will become or be part of what will be a national plan. But what I want to ask is tapping into the purpose of the Belize network of NGOs. We don't have watchdog organizations in Belize, but our civil societies and our unions have always been very vocal about reminding people to be guardians of what is taking place within our country. How do you see yourself fitting into this role? It's a tough time to be critical, because it's fair to say that no one really has the right answer of how to move forward. But as you clearly said, we know our patterns or political patterns for election, and it is a critical time for us to be very vigilant about monies coming in, how they're spent, looking at resources, and how decisions are being made. So has the BNN discussed how you play that role as a civil society in the time ahead?
Yeah. This goes back to the purpose of NGOs. NGOs exist really and truly to fill gaps that government has not been able to fill, or needs that the government is not able to meet. So that in essence is one of the main roles of an NGO, to try and fill some of these gaps. So in times of crisis, those needs become even more pronounced. So there's a greater need for NGOs at this point in time. And our current membership, as Froila mentioned earlier, covers really the gamut of the different social, environmental, and other issues and sectors. No? So there's a massive hole that government won't be able to cover, to fill on their own. And so at a time like this is when we need an even stronger partnership between government and non-governmental organizations. Yeah. There will be a continued role for civil society.
Can I just say something quickly? I agree with what the center is saying. If you recall, Marlene, I started this conversation by saying that we are members of civil society. Our role is to ensure that sustainable development happens in this country. Yeah. And from the time of the genesis of BNN, we have been engaging our members in how best to do that. We need to go from individual mission statements to national development strategies. And I think that is the role of BNN. And what we're doing here has been validated to a certain extent from the very beginning by our different members. So we're doing something that on our own we cannot do. I mean, Satine is just a small grassroots organization, but by being a member of the Belize network of NGOs, we can contribute to the national discussion. And really, that is what we're doing. It's not to be critical. we can have a discussion, professional discussion, objective discussion, and that is where this plan comes in. We're not putting the blame on anyone. What we're saying is we need to do better and we want to be partners in making a better country for all of us.
All right. Excellent. Well, we do look forward, as you said, you're going to be making this plan publicly available at some point, I'd imagine?
Yes, indeed we are.
It's already available via our Facebook page, and we are sharing it every chance we get.
All right. Well, thank you very much for discussing it with us. There's a lot more in the document itself, so we do encourage people to find it on Facebook or contact one of the NGOs to be able to get a copy and read it for yourselves as well. It really tells us a lot.
It would be great if you make it available on your website as well.
We might be able to, on our Facebook at least. But thank you very much. We appreciate you. All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Stay safe. And with that, we are going to go ahead and take a break, and we will come back and have a conversation with the University of Belize Faculty and Staff Union. Please stay tuned.
This COVID update was brought to you by Fulltech Systems, your technology center, where you'll come for the price, but stay for the service.